Hey, Ernie Cefalu, it is so nice to have you with me on Ernie's Corner in the Block Party. Ernie, when I saw that you did work for Bloodstone, it was like, oh, I've got to find out that backstory. And I love the song "Natural High,"
Oh, yeah.
and they their blending of voices was just so beautiful. And I'm
Yeah.
seeing a really neat album cover design behind you.
Yeah. Well, even though it was in that soul genre, it's interesting that you should talk about the way they blended their voices. They remind me of groups that came later, like Crosby, Stills, and Nash, or actually in that time, the three-part harmony or more, the Eagles, they were amazing at doing that. Well, Bloodstone was an incredible band. I never got to meet them. I wish I would have, but, a lot of times we did we weren't always, I love doing the way we did it. We made friends with the groups. We delivered what they wanted. We exceeded their expectations, and they kept on using us. You know, Record companies, we didn't really focus on that much. But sometimes, things came to us that way. And this Bloodstone album is very interesting because it has a history that goes back to Jesus Christ Superstar, and how I can link that together by 3 degrees or 4 degrees of separation. This is much quicker. There was a guy named Bill Levy who was the creative director at Decca Records when we did Jesus Christ Superstar. He chose my approach over the person that they had been using for a long time and he had already made friends with, and took me under his wing and taught me how to be a creative director. And, I went from the agency that I was working at when I did Jesus Christ Superstar, Norman Levy, to Craig Braun, which is where I did the Rolling Stones tongue and all these other covers, Cheech and Chong and others, Grand Funk. And, part of the thing that, and I had mentioned this in a show or two before, part of the thing that our job was to get work from the creative directors and the upper guys, heads of marketing and stuff in record companies. They weren't really interested in focusing on relationships with bands, which was another differentiator between us and other people that were in our industry, who just would prey on the low hanging fruit, which was make friends with the creative director and he'll use you. He gets 30 releases a month. He'll use you on stuff, and so it goes back to Bill Levy. Bill Levy, when I went to Craig's, there was also the fact that he needed a creative director. I had done the Stones thing, but he had a bigger picture of, hey, you're really good friends and you've done work with Bill Levy over at Decca Records. Why don't you, we've been trying to get to him. We've been trying to get to people above him, but we haven't had any luck. You have this great relationship. Bring them to us, bring it in to us, and we'll give you a percentage of the sale or whatever. And, it sounded very cool because when I first went to work there, I mean, I idolized this guy. I was enamored by the young people that were making it happen. I mean, the agency that I was before, the average age was probably 50 or 55. I'm in my 20s, and all these people were in their 20s as well. And it was incredible. It was just like, man, oh man, this is so great. So I thought, well, this is an interesting proposition. So when I approached Bill Levy with the idea, he said, absolutely not. And I thought, well, I don't, I mean, don't get mad at me. I mean, I'm just making a suggestion. I'm over here now, and he said, he had given me this dissertation on how he felt about Craig and Craig Braun and that whole way that he did stuff. And they had tried to get to him for quite a while. So I wasn't counting on any work after that. And it really wasn't critical to the company, Craig Braun, because they had plenty of other work. They were doing work for pretty much all RCA, Columbia, Capitol. They were doing work already with these companies. And, I guess Decca would have been another, cherry on top of the icing, So anyway, after I left Craig Braun, Bill and I still stayed friends. We were in California. He was in New York. He had now, we had always stayed in touch, and he didn't hold anything against me because I did work for him after I had, asked him if he would be interested in bringing work over to Craig Braun. And, you got to remember too, that another reason why the record companies were so critical was because they were, at this point, they pretty much were controlling the production of where that album cover was going to be printed. Okay. And that was a big key because Craig was a broker. Craig bought from the printer and sold to the record company, everything, any kind of printed stuff. So, and who creates that? Who controls that? It's usually the creative director. The other people, head of marketing, that's a whole other advertising stuff. It's a different, a whole different genre of what that needed to be done and the people that do it. So, that was would have been another cherry on top of the pie too. And he was so interested in doing that. But anyway, after we left and Tony and I, came out to California and we started Pacific Pioneer, he stayed in touch with us. He sent us a big Lucy graph. I think I mentioned that once before in one of our shows. And, he gave us some work. And one of the albums that he gave us was this Bloodstone album, Natural High, in 1973. And, it was interesting because it was connected to more than, just Bill Levy. Bill Levy was friends with a guy named Mike Werner. And you might know his name because he's worked with groups like David Bowie, Eric Clapton, Fleetwood Mac, and we had worked on a Climax Blues Band album that we did, and that's one that I want to talk about later.
Oh, that's good. That's good.
Yeah, they were great. And then there's also a John Mayall album that we did that I want to talk about in a future show that we had worked with Mike Werner, and he's friends with Bill Levy. And it's like this whole crazy thing that was going on with how, our way of doing business was the right way. And having things like Bones Howe and Shep Gordon and Mike Werner and Bill Levy, those kinds of things were more than just business relationships. They were personal relationships. They were personal relationships, not because I schmoozed them and bought them lunch and stuff. It was more about we could be counted on. We could be, if they gave us something, they knew that what they would get back would exceed their expectations. That's what we always did. That's what I did. That's why, and I really made a career out of being friends. I can go back to people that I only did one thing for and talk to them, or people like, Alive or Black Oak, Arkansas. Those people are part of my life. They're part of my history, and I'm part of theirs. There's a mutual respect that happens there. And we weren't just selling them what we knew they would buy. We were selling them what we knew they needed. And that's what they expected. Bloodstone is a perfect example of that. That logo I did for him. And again, I'll send you these files. I apologize for the quality of this because I have an album somewhere. Okay, I have an album cover somewhere, but it's somewhere amongst over 3,000 pieces of images and over 3,000 photographs. So I will at some point find it, but unfortunately I wanted to talk about this piece because it really sort of brings a lot of great feelings back when we did this. I mean, it doesn't look like a lot, but what we got was a little bit more than we usually get. We got a group shot, which we didn't get with, Foghat.
I know.
And so we had a group shot of them in a car, and it was like this kind of far away shot. It wasn't like they were up close like this. They were far away, and and you can't take something like that and blow it up, because it only gets weirder. So that's why I was hoping I could get that album cover. But what we did was we kept it small. So the restriction was, okay, we got a front cover shot here and we got a back cover shot. We got two images. And Bill Levy was also a photographer, as well as a creative director. And he would go to a lot of the concerts, get backstage, and he'd be taking pictures. He had an incredible photographer, but even better creative director. And one of my major mentors for the rest of my life. And so the back cover shot was a group shot of not only the group, but everybody that they knew. So they even got the postman in there, right?
Oh, that's really neat.
Yeah. I mean, it is a family. It's like a Sly and the Family Stone kind of thing, But it was, again, a small shot with a lot of people. And what do you do? How do you blow something like that up? And then they really didn't have a logo. So I did this logo and I did the lettering in black and white. And then I had this piece of marbleized paper And in those days, you sort of did a mechanical where you had the paper on a board and then you did an overlay, showing how this drops out of that. And so, now that's done in a second on a computer, but back in the day, it was a whole complicated thing. And I wanted to sort of keep the album clean. So using the white, unlike these images that I have here that are kind of really funky, the actual album is really pretty. It's white. The car they're in is red, and, there was really no way of, unlike the Foghat cover where I had individual shots, and I could maybe feature them with this group shot smaller in the middle, make it even better because the more you blow it up, the worse it gets. But I didn't even have that. And I wouldn't know who the group was on this back cover. I think it didn't matter to them because they have the postman, the mailman's in there too. And I know he's not part of the group. So, and like I said, there's got to be 100 people in this shot, So anyway, I came up with this logo. We decided to use the white space to our advantage. And, Mike Werner is an incredible producer. And I had only talked to him a couple of times. My partner, Tony, was dealing with him, and Bill Levy. So, and Tony and Bill became good friends, even though Tony was and this is funny, even though Tony was the sales guy that was relentlessly calling on him from Craig Braun, and he got to the point where he wouldn't even see him, wouldn't even take his calls. He just had this thing about that company. And, and Bill was a very straight up guy. He was a real New Yorker. California people would go, "Hey man, I really love you. I love you."
Peace and love.
Yeah. And meanwhile, they're sticking a knife in your back and throwing you under the bus. New Yorkers will tell you exactly how they feel about you. And they'll tell you quick, and I love that about New York. It didn't not only have the energy, you're engulfed in this energy, but people that were different. I grew up on the West Coast, San Jose. I mean, it was a whole different world. And I found it so intriguing, and it was also so motivating. I mean, I couldn't wait to go to work, when I was there, and especially when I started doing album covers. But then, coming out to California and starting Pacific on Air, that was a whole separate, opportunity. But so when we did this Bloodstone album, it was really kind of an interesting challenge, like I said, because it just really, there wasn't, again, a whole lot to work with, but you try and make the best out of it. And they were very happy. I mean, again, Bill Levy was in touch with Mike Werner, and, we got feedback from him, from Bill, because we had become good friends with him. And, we did this album, we had started Pacific Pioneer. So, and Natural High is funny because I remember listening to this song. Bill Levy was in his office in New York, and I was in Los Angeles. And he said, "You got it. This is a great single." I mean, these guys had been around. This wasn't their first album. They all had histories.
They were
I'm
the
I'm sure the history of each and every one of them.
They were known as, they were a Kansas City vocal group, and they started out as the Sinceres. And it's great because that's with their voices. Vocal groups, the magic with them, you get to hear like the bass and the baritone and then the tenor, and just something with Bloodstone. I don't know what it is, but it just melds beautifully.
Well, you know what it is? They were one of the groundbreakers and influential bands in moving doo-wop to Motown. Okay, Motown had a sound. Okay, and these guys were around in the doo-wop and transcended that, made that switch. It's like us going from album covers to doing corporate America. I mean, some people can't do that. They focus on one thing. These guys were kind of like you said, the vocals were amazing. Okay. And it really, really comes through on Natural High. When I heard that song over the phone in Bill Levy's office, and I'm in New York, and he's in New York and I'm in LA, the same thing happened to me that happens every time I hear a song. And not because I have some kind of golden ear, but I think I'm a consumer and a lover of all types of music. When I hear Ode to Billy Joe, okay, when I hear, the Billie Jean, when I hear, songs that you just listen to one time and man, that's going to be a huge hit. That is going to be a huge hit. And I'm not right every time, but when I heard Natural High, I was high. The vocals, the way they produced it, the way Mike did an incredible job, an incredible job. And like I said, we worked with him later on because the Climax Blues Band and John Mayall. And the other interesting thing about that song was that it was like ranked, I think, number 2 in the soul charts, and number 2 in the album was ranked number 2 in the album, soul album, and the single was ranked number 4 on the soul charts, in the singles charts. And Quentin Tarantino used that song in a couple of his movies. So it was an interesting song. It was one of those kind of things that actually the movie that he used it was Jackie Brown. Okay, it was used in that, and he was a big lover of soul music and a fan of theirs, and again, talking with Mike Werner was pretty amazing, and it was like talking, with Bill, what's his name? Oh, duh, now I have this brain block. No, Alice's producer, Bob Ezrin. Okay, Bob is a great friend. We've been friends since school's out. And he's one of those kind of guys that has an incredible story. And Mike is another one that's done so much stuff. And this album was really a lot of fun to do. It was, again, doing it for Bill Levy. It holds a special place in my heart. And
I think when you look at that back cover and that photograph, I think it captures to me the word is camaraderie. People, how music brings people together.
Yeah.
I think it
from all different walks of life, because if you look close, there's people in suits and ties, there's the mailman, there's just everyday people. It does that. Yes, you're absolutely right. And I wished I could have made it bigger and clearer. I mean, today there's ways digitally that you can take an image like that and really sweeten it and sharpen it. There wasn't that much ability. There wasn't that. I mean, you had some leeway when they made film, when they separated the images, they can etch the film in chemicals and lighten and darken certain things. And, that was a whole other process that most record companies wouldn't spend the time or money to do.
No.
So, luckily we were able to do that for some groups like Alice, the Black Sabbath. I mean, they had the budgets, Groups like this really didn't have that kind of a budget, but this song was amazing. I mean, and when we talk about the song for this album,
it's coming up. Let me just say, I want to compliment you on that logo, because the group's name is Bloodstone, and you managed to get the red for blood and the stone in there. I'm thinking about beautiful marble, because what it's bringing up for me, being a Baltimore girl, is those marble steps. And
sure.
Bloodstone it's amazing how you captured that.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you. I mean, and that's, something that I never really thought about, but you're absolutely right. It does have that blood, just enough blood mixed with the concrete or the texture of what it is, definitely has that kind of feel to it. I never really thought about that, but then again, that's why we're such good companions here. You bring a lot of times you bring to mind stuff that I didn't really even think of at the time. I mean, it happens a lot, because when you're doing a lot of work, we were doing between 6 and 8 album covers a month, and we were doing probably 4 to 5, sometimes as many as 8 corporate pieces at the same time. So it was that variety. Variety is the spice of life, but it's also the fuel for creativity.
Mm-hmm.
It just kept everybody on their toes. It was like the Rolling Stones project that we talked about last time, and it's those kinds of challenges, to be able to keep you sharp, Because one minute you're doing this, and the next minute, and you're very comfortable doing album covers, very comfortable doing illustration. But now we got this corporate piece, and they want a photograph because it's a product that they want their customers to see, not an illustration because the photograph is more real. It exists. So, it was an interesting, and it was like Drew and the illustrators would get involved in the photography as well. So they're learning. I mean, one of the things that Drew had said early on, when, not early on, but later on and earlier in his career as an individual, incredible painter, was that, he learned a lot at Pacific Pioneer. And the biggest thing he learned was how to take direction, which was something that was alien to him because he was a painter. He was a fine artist. Fine artists don't take direction. They don't change something because you want it changed or you're willing to pay me money for it. So that's how it was wired. So to be able to, and again, it's funnier because later in his career, when he got very successful, he sort of slipped back to that. And I mean, I had a few friends that were creative directors at movie companies, and they would say, we'd sit in this meeting with him and tell him what we wanted. And then he would come back with something completely different that he felt was better than what we were suggesting. So it's funny. And you know what? He had every right to do that. There is nobody that has done what he did. I compare him to Andy Warhol. Andy Warhol changed the fine art world to pop art. He is the grandfather of pop art. Drew is the grandfather of movie posters, transcending from photography to illustration, and illustration that had more life in it than the photograph. And he was good at that. For me, the best example of that is the Harrison Ford portrait that he did for Raiders of the Lost Ark. I mean, that looks more like Harrison Ford than Harrison Ford, So anyway, so the song, I Need Your Love is a great cut on that album. But I got to go with the low-hanging fruit. I know Burton, when he sees this episode, he's going to go, see, I told you. I'll get an email. From him.
Oh, no.
Yeah, and it's all your fault, Joyce, because I think we both agree that Natural High is we just love to hear it.
Adam and Eve over here, Ernie. I'm bad. I'm sorry. But it's a beautiful song, that
It is.
and they played it. I remember, when we were listening to early FM, because it was not only the prog rock, it wasn't all, the hard rock.
This song got me into Swan Silvertongue.
Wow.
And that became one of my favorite gospel groups of all time. And we had talked about this before. They're an incredible soul group, gospel group. They're the best, I think. It's like Jimmy Cliff and Bob Marley with reggae. Those are the guys. Toots and the Maytags, and all these other groups kind of emulate them. And they just set themselves apart. And I think that Bloodstone is one of those groups that